Hello and welcome to the first edition of Idea Exchange. In Idea Exchange, we intend to bring experts from real estate sector to talk about various issues and problems in the future of this industry. We have been doing that for quite some time. If you have noticed, for the last few weeks, we have been giving extensive coverage of environmental issues and which are related to real estate sector. And there are also other issues which are arcane, quite in depth, that we have covered, issues like subprime crisis and securitization. We have also covered issues which are quite inexplicable, where industry experts will not be able to comprehend or explain things to the larger public. To discuss these very issues, we have started this special program called Idea Exchange. And for this first edition of Idea Exchange, we have a very special guest today. My guest today is Simon Carter. He is Regional Head of Asia Pacific of Sustainability from Asia Pacific from Colliers International. Colliers International, for the uninitiated, is amongst the world's best consultancy firms dedicated totally to real estate sector. Welcome to the show, Mr. Carter.
It's great to be here.
How are you feeling in Bangalore?
It's an exciting city. I haven't explored it too much yet, but there's clearly a lot of development and people are buoyant about real estate here.
Wonderful. So let me begin by asking you, what was the inspiration to write your first report that was called Lifeblood? What was the inspiration, as well as what drove you to write that piece, that report?
Lifeblood was a report we wrote a couple of years ago when we saw in Australia, in the office sector in particular, tenant requirements transforming with what we called 5 key emerging imperatives. The battle for talent and the need to attract and retain staff, the move into the knowledge economy and knowledge working, corporate social responsibility, duty of care, legal requirements of managers and directors, and also business continuity with power and data supply. And we saw that in many ways the work environments and the buildings that these tenants procured is an important part of their solution. And this has certainly played out in Australia. And the type of thinking in Lifeblood has been a great manifesto for landlords to better prepare their stock for transforming tenant requirements. And at the heart of all of that, and overlapping some of those imperatives, is sustainability, which just grows and grows in Australia as an imperative in property.
But if your book is based in Australia, how does it relate to the rest of the world, especially to the developing country like India or China?
Well, those 5 imperatives will play out in different ways in different locations. There's certainly some very sophisticated occupiers in this country who are exploring knowledge working. How can they get a greater flow of knowledge amongst their staff? Break out of the silos, if you like. There's certainly organisations in India very concerned about their reputation and recognising that as part of corporate social responsibility, a smart response to sustainability, including green work environments and green buildings, pays off for them in the long run. And there's certainly battles for talent. I imagine in Bangalore to get good employees in IT, that could be challenging at times.
You know, you've been traveling across the world. According to you, if I ask you, which are the 3 most environmentally sustainable buildings, what would they be?
Gosh, there's billions of buildings in this world. If we're to talk about the most environmentally sustainable, it is probably a slum dwelling in Bangalore or in Mumbai. The very simplest dwellings are of course the most sustainable because they use the least resources, they don't consume much energy and water and produce much waste. Amongst the big contemporary buildings, there's a wide range around the world. Certainly in Australia we're creating what would be classified as world's best practice. And here in India there's a number of commercial buildings, such as the Wipro building, which we mentioned in our latest report, and that is rated platinum on the LEED rating scheme for green buildings. all over the world there's terrific examples. It's hard to pick one or two.
Every time I meet you, I learn so much. I learn so many new things. I never knew the slums in Mumbai could be the most environmentally sustainable.
Well, per person, they don't consume much resources. So on that basis, certainly.
You mentioned about talent crunch. I would add one more aspect to it, that is the rising cost of raw materials and the rising cost of land itself in a country like India. Now, don't you think, from an environmentalist point of view, that is a blessing in disguise?
It can be. The sooner that we learn to operate with less resources, less materials, and environmentally more benign, less damaging ones, the better our future will be. And in many ways, we're playing a waiting game until we declare it's a real crisis and respond. And you can see it playing out right now with the rising fuel prices on the back of oil prices.
Exactly.
We've let it creep up and creep up and creep up. Not just India, everywhere in the world. And now we're feeling the pain. But we could have begun to have weaned ourselves off oil a long time ago. The same with energy in buildings, water in buildings.
The same thing goes for food prices. Today, farmers are getting better remuneration for that. It's considered a blessing in disguise, after all. Now, if in your job as heading the Department for Environment Sustainability, isn't your job a little difficult in the sense that it's very hard to sell that concept of environment sustainability, especially because these days real estate is all about business. It's about rate of returns.
Well, this is what is making my job easy. The smart developers, the smart occupiers are understanding the importance of sustainability to their organisation. If they want to attract and retain talent, then green buildings, then good credentials with how they operate as a business in their communities, in their marketplaces, that's attractive. If, with rising costs of energy and fuel, etc., that only makes the business case for green buildings better. There's a wide range of factors which the smart developers, the smart stakeholders in our industry are able to recognise as benefits and realise with some good investment decisions.
I can't resist this temptation to ask you. This question has been quite often been asked. Do you think a developing country like India and China should not grow more than 7% GDP growth? Don't you think that's the most suitable growth rate for a country like India and China?
I'm not an economist, so it's hard to put a figure on it. But it's whatever is appropriate to a nation such that they can sustain it in the long term. If the amount of growth is causing the sort of environmental destruction we're seeing in many places in the world. I was reading a National Geographic just last week about the Yangtze River and how such a large proportion of that is toxic to human beings. And yet that water source is the heart of China. And so when you have those effects occurring, you do have to question whether the approach to growth is the right one. Are they sacrificing their future for today? And that same principle, once again, applies in many, many different places all over the world.
Colliers has been in India since 1995. Can you tell us about the kind of changes that have taken place in real estate sector since you came here? It must be a churning.
It's hard for me to comment because I only came for the first time in 2006 as part of a trek across the Himalayas on that instance.
I know that. I guess I met you at the time.
That's right, that's when we first met.
Very true. I think I should tell my viewers about the kind of the response I got by emails when I published your interview in the real estate magazine which I used to manage at the time. People from Singapore to London, there are so many mails talking about those issues which you dealt with regarding environmental sustainability of real estate sector. It's remarkable.
Terrific.
And okay, now let's shift focus. Let's talk about malls. Malls have become such a big thing in India, the organized retail. There are things like in Gurgaon, in a particular street, there are over 14 The last count was 14. Over 14 malls back to back in the same street. And there are also experts. The other day when I was talking to Mr. Andrew Livermore of Hypercity in Mumbai, he was of the opinion that so many malls on the same street in Gurgaon is not feasible. What's your opinion on that, besides environmental sustainability?
That is also difficult to answer. I don't specialise in retail, real estate, of course, but from an economics point of view, I guess it entirely depends on what that market can sustain and what growth people perceive for the future. Okay. But I would have to assume that with that number of malls, I really hope they've got the figures right.
True, very true, very true. And you know, when you have so many malls coming up in India, I guess it was the last CII function in Mumbai where there was this Wipro official who raised this issue of the natural resources being enough to build all these structures in India itself, because most of these raw material come from the local area. So do we have so much of natural resources with us?
Well, I don't think we have enough in the world, and there's plenty of research which explores that, and that will certainly be a barrier to growth in the future for some nations. Speaking on malls though, the construction of the malls obviously consumes a lot of materials, but what are malls for? They're machines for giving us goods to take home to fill our houses with.
True.
And so that's, in many ways, is probably the more concerning part of the environmental footprint. It's the role they play in our society. What proportion of the goods that we consume in malls or shopping in general do we need, and what is it that we just want for the sake of it, maybe to gratify ourselves? That's the sort of questions we're going to have to ask as a society in order to ensure a sustainable future.
Simon, I want to ask you more questions on that, but right now we'll take a break. Keep watching. Welcome back. Let's ask more questions to Simon Carter on environmental sustainability. Welcome back. You were talking about the issues related to real estate as well as retail. My next question would be, there is a particular mall which is going to come up. It's a proposed mall which is going to come up in Gurgaon. Now, this mall is going to give the feel of Venice. There are going to be waterways, and the customers would have to board a boat and then visit each of the stores. How environmentally sustainable is that kind of an idea, although it gives fantastic novelty to the place?
It sounds a little bit like Las Vegas, almost like a false reality, which is a lot of fun, and we should certainly create architecture which enlivens us, which raises our spirits. But if the purpose of it is to maximise consumption, then we really have to consider whether overall that is a good contribution to our society. I'd also be concerned about shopping trolleys sinking as well, but I'm sure they've worked that out.
What would be India's position in green building construction today, as of today? Did India not start late when it comes to green buildings?
If you look around the world, India is doing very well in terms of contemporary green buildings, putting aside the fact that India in fact has hundreds, if not thousands of years of green buildings, the vernacular architecture of this nation.
True.
In 2002, the first building was certified for a LEED rating.